Hi, I'm Kent.
And I'm Anna.
And this is Film and Family, a podcast about feature filmmaking for professionals in the film industry with families. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in.
All right, so today on the podcast, we've got James Hall. James is a longtime collaborator of ours, in fact, and fellow Brigham Young University film school graduate. He is super talented from day one. We've admired his work. He put out short content in school that was really standout. It was often surprising in one way or another. And I don't mean that facetiously, like it was often very bold, or he just worked really hard, or he had really creative approaches to filmmaking that we always liked. He also is an alum of the first wave of Beta
Film and Family Academy
students, yeah, whatever you want to call them. So he's kind of an alumni of that as well. And James was awesome because he really did experience quite the transformation. We were just thrilled to see what a powerful effect the model has, not only in our lives, but in anyone who really takes it seriously and practices it, or kind of goes through the coaching and puts it into practice, how powerful an effect the model can have for anyone. So James will talk a little bit in this episode about his film that he's currently working on and how the model helped him get to where he is today, as well as the periphery effects that the model and those principles have had on other aspects of his life, personal and professional.
And not only is he a talented filmmaker, but he also is just someone who attracts a lot of talented people because he's a joy to hang out with. I think you'll really enjoy this episode and getting to know him. So with no further ado, here we go.
I got it. It's like, got it or leave meeting. It's like, oh boy.
This is a good start. All right, you guys, we have our good friend James Hall with us on the podcast today, and he is a film writer and director. He's working on a feature film right now. He went to film school, same place we did, at BYU. And anything else that is important to know about you, James?
First time ever having an introduction. Woo.
James, is there anything else like significant or noteworthy that you want to put on your eHarmony account here?
Harmony.
Noteworthy.
I like boardwalks on the beach.
I fought off a shark anyway.
Yeah.
I'll put down Adrenaline Junkie.
Yeah, for real.
Well, thanks for coming onto the show, James. We are just big fans, first of all, of your ser. and we also we went to school together, so we've just admired your work pretty much forever. So thanks for jumping on, and we're excited to talk to you about, well, a little bit about some of your history and also just about what you're working on and where you're going with some of the stuff that you're doing. So could we kick it off with a question? How did you fall in love with film?
Well, it's an ongoing affair, I guess. My love affair with film. That's my autobiography. That's put on my tab. That's a really good question. And I think like it happens in installments. You could say like, hey, it was that one time that I was watching, Lord of the Rings, and it was the Fellowship of the Ring. And I was so angry because I didn't know that it was a trilogy. And so I was expecting it to end. And then, oh, wait, no, everyone's going to die. Or some people are going to die. Some people are going to get kidnapped. And we're just going to leave you on a cliffhanger. And that was kind of challenging to me as a 9-year-old. And so I wanted to know more. And that kind of created more of an intrigue and kind of bond with filmmaking and figuring out how did they do this? And where is the story going to go? And how did it make me feel this way? And I think that happens for many different films, especially as you continue watching. And so that was probably one of the first big ones. Or I guess you could, if you really want to go real back, it would be Lion King. As a kid, I loved that one. That was so great. and then, there's probably something like that every year or every, couple of months, we were just like, wow, how did they do that? Or, well, it made me feel this way, and then it's something new. So it's kind of cinema, I guess, in that way, is a little bit like a person, constantly changing, surprising.
Yeah, so you just said that it's like this ongoing thing, and that every couple months you see something that kind of makes you fall back in love with it. What's the most recent, if I can make it more of a recency question as opposed to a
I was wondering
primacy?
that too. You said every few months or year or so.
Yeah. Okay, this was an interesting one. So we're in Oklahoma City, and I'm with Eric Nauman and Cameron Babcock. And they took Dean's horror class way back at BYU days. And they showed me Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I was hesitant to watch because I'm like, I don't do the slasher thing, had no interest. And watching it, and I was like, wow, there's a whole lot more than what this genre, the seed of, what that film began and what the genre grew into is very deceiving, because what it starts out as is a very interesting commentary on actually like carnivore meat eating kind of thing. And it eventually just goes, and all the blood and stuff like that. And that's kind of what, you think of the slasher genre today. But the beginning was very interesting, and I was very intrigued, and Cameron introduced me to that.
You're talking about the 70s one, right?
Yeah, the way back.
Yeah, not the 2005 or whatever the remake was.
Now, you say you're not into those, but I remember in film school that you always seemed to have some extra fake blood ready to go for whatever you were filming.
Part of that was just always ready for whenever we needed them. They're like, hey, odds are we're going to need some fake blood at some point. So I'll just stock it, just, be a good friend. Someone might need it.
It's hilarious.
Most of us carry a first aid kit, but James has a blood kit. In his...
Yes. What was the last movie, Anna, that we ever had any blood in our movies? I can't think of one. That's kind of crazy.
We have a kid who sprains his wrist.
Yeah. And like back in the day, James, I was just like you in high school and early college. It was like, how do I like tape a firecracker to a ketchup packet from Burger King and like stick it behind someone's shirt and then put like a piece of cardboard behind that so that you don't blow a hole in their skin. And that's our safe way of, but then you never really know when the actor's supposed to pretend to pull the trigger because it's just on a fuse.
He just keeps doing it.
Yeah, just keep doing it. You'll just cut to it when it works. And or you'll just have him kind of like pretend like he's spraying bullets, and you'll just put like a whole strip of them on there. I'm speaking about church activities now.
Neutral Nights, Young Men's improv movie.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So
you mentioned kind of this first like admiration of film and the magic of it and not really knowing how it worked, being intrigued as a 9-year-old. But when did you really decide like, I'm going to do this for a living? That's
okay. I mean, I'd always wanted to do it. I was always, because I always love storytelling. I'm very long-winded, as you both know. I don't think we've ever had a conversation underneath an hour. We just go off, and that's great, and I love it. And so I've always been kind of in love with storytelling, and that's just, I think, just ingrained. And I think it started to transfer over to film. Honestly, kind of like you were talking about, Kent, is it was just like you get a group together, or you pull siblings and you're just like, hey, I got mom's video camera and she doesn't need the last 20 minutes of her wedding. So we're just going to take over that. Cool. It's the boring part. Let's go.
That's hilarious.
Oh, no.
Is that a true story?
Maybe. Mom, you can't prove it.
There's no evidence. You can't prove it.
It's a confession.
Oh my gosh.
The real story is we don't know how James's film got there because he switched the tape for sure. But so I guess it was a lot of trial and error. And it was always something fun. I think, to be honest, for me to find out that that was something I wanted to do is I had to try everything else. When I was going to apply to the BYU film program, my family is close friends with the Parkins and Jeff Parkin. So I went up to BYU right when I was applying, and I talked to Jeff, and he just said, James, film's awesome. It's the best thing ever. But if you can do anything else, go do it. And my family, you know, they weren't into the arts. And so that wasn't a thing. It wasn't a viable option. So I kind of was nudged into first into dentistry. And then I started to take the prerequisites to do kind of like a medical track. And then I didn't like that. So I went business and accounting and finance and literally just took, that's why I was in school for a dynasty, is because I was just taking all these classes and all these other things, kind of skirting around what I really wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to do the minor, always wanted to do the minor. And I found out that the difference between applying for the major and the minor was just the short film, the fun part. So I was like, hey, let's just apply for the major. We'll do it. We'll try it. And I received word that I got in, and I was heading out on a long trip to Idaho with my dad. And we were in the car 5 minutes, just barely getting on the freeway. And he turned to me and he's like, James, I think you should go for film. And that's when I said, funny story, I am. And I got in and I'm doing it. Thanks. And I think ever since then, it was just always about, you know, just giving it my all and trying and just, you know, seeing if it worked. And because I realized that I'd rather have the understanding that like, hey, I went out, I did this thing, and maybe you have to pivot and do something different, go into something else, or that's a lateral move, you know, adjacent to filmmaking, kind of like I'm doing now. I mean, commercial work, but it's still great. But that I didn't want to do one of those other things, one of those other trades, and have this regret of like, what if I went for it? What if I tried? So that was the motivation. I don't know if that answered the question, but there you go.
So you said something about Jeff talking about. I've heard him say this, by the way. Yeah, if you can do anything else, you should, because film is super hard. Like, do you believe that, and why?
Is filmmaking hard?
Yeah, and like even just like what Jeff said.
Would you
like,
pass along that advice to someone else?
Ooh, good questions. I don't know if necessarily if you can do anything else, because I think every trade is hard. You know, roofing. I'm just on the roof all day, and I'm the guy with the camera, and I'm not even carrying the heavy supplies and shingles and membrane and all this other kind of stuff. And that goes from anything. And I think anything, any field is hard. And I think if you're wanting to do something easy, then that's a that's a whole other introspective avenue you got to go down. But I think film is hard in its own particular way, because I think everyone thinks they can do it, and they think they can do it better. And so film is very subjective. For a roof, you put it on right or wrong. It's objective. It is you did your job or you didn't do it. Filmmaking, especially with commercial work, you do something for a client and he or she may not have been very specific about their tastes, or they say, do whatever you want. And then you find out later that they actually have very strong tastes and you aren't operating in the realm of them. And so you still delivered a product, but it may not be exactly what they wanted. So we've all been there, done that. But I think it's hard, obviously, for the physical, the mental, the emotional. It pulls from all those. But I also think there's a little extra measure where it's so subjective and everyone thinks they can do it. It just seems easy and glamorous on the outside, and it's just so accessible, and it's just there, and it just happens. And it's organic when you click on it or sit down and watch it. And it's not.
Yeah. You know, I always feel like, I even felt like growing up and even just going through school and entering the field, really good DPs, I look at what they do and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I could do that. And like the best of the best editors, I'm like, yeah, there's a reason they're the best. And then you look at the best of the best directors and you're like, oh yeah, I could do that. You're like for some reason directing, like
I don't think that
no
anymore.
no one understands exactly what it is. Everyone I think has a sort of different definition of what a director does. Even the great directors probably disagree with each other regarding it. What exactly is your job? Now, I think once you get into the studio system, the playing field levels out a little bit in terms of not in terms of style or workflow or craft, but it does level out in terms of, look, we've done movies for Marvel or we've done movies for Paramount or we've done movies for Netflix. Once you've done it for them, like you said, you understand that client almost. And so we get what the job is and you start to get a unique perspective of that. But especially in the indie film world, that job is wide open. What does an indie film director do, especially one that hasn't made movies for the studio? There's nothing that doesn't count about indie films, but sometimes it's a little more free game, especially when you're like sub-million, you know? It's really, you could do whatever the heck you want. I mean, and even in the big game, there are sometimes still people like Terrence Malick who it's like, I don't even know what he's doing on set. Like, what does that even look like? Or like Duplass Brothers or whatever. These guys are all doing stuff radically different. So we all kind of think, I could direct movies, but that craft in some ways is easier because there isn't such a hard definition, and in some ways it's harder because you can't check boxes with that job. It works or it doesn't, and you've got to come up with the concept fresh, and then you've got to execute it, and it's got to work or it doesn't. So it's very, very tricky.
Well, and I think that that's true for a lot of jobs, not just director, but there are so many layers that people don't see. They see, even if you're in the industry and you're on set, they see you show up to set, but they don't see all the preparation that's gone into you being able to show up and make a decision on the spot, and all the reasons why that you've made the decisions you have. They just see you like choose something, and it's very easy to just be critical of that. And I think on the other hand, a lot of people just see it in the theater. You see it when it's winning an award or when you're getting up on stage, and you're right, it does look glamorous and it looks like, wow, I could do that. I could get up on stage and accept an award. Like,
Yeah, I have to tell you now.
Is that the job?
First thing I wrote.
I could get paid lots of money. Why is that hard?
but that's like years of someone's life, right? You know?
Seriously,
So.
what's taking them so long? I could make a movie in like 2 weeks. Why does it take them years? So I want to talk a little bit about not just the job, but what about the lifestyle? So I look at people like, for example, doctors. They have to work weekends, you know, or firefighters or OBGYNs. They have to kind of be on call, you know, just like constantly. And then there's people who work other kinds of jobs where it's very structured, you know, and everything. What about film? What does the lifestyle look like? And have you found it difficult to have a healthy lifestyle working in it?
Oh, I think it's, I think there's a couple of different schools of thought, because I think it's a little bit different, you know, if you're freelance or you're I mean, I've done in LA and things like that. And again, I was just a very, very lowly peon on some of the shows and things like that. And they seem pretty structured, but assistant work, it was around the clock, even on weekends and things like that. And a little bit of kind of on call when I did some of that, even Saturdays, you know, you're like, hey, my car's in the shop. I need you to go pick it up and go downtown, and like, oh, half your day's gone. But also kind of doing more freelance and being in Wyoming, it's, I would say, very similar. So I think the boundaries are the ones that you create and the ones that you stand by. And, you know, it can be rather difficult. I mean, just like if it was, you know, when I was a waiter, there were sometimes I have to work Sundays, but I think that can also, you know, be the same for film. And usually it's, you know, a very concentrated, you know, you're working a lot, very long for a few weeks, and then there's a break and you kind of rejuvenate, and then you go back into it. Or if you have something that you have clients or things like that you can have, it can be more consistent or steady or just, you know, staggered out. But I honestly think it's just the boundaries that you create. And going back to what you were saying before is I think the process should serve the result. So like, what does a director do when he or she, going in and doing and making the decisions? Ultimately, that's what's so great about independent film is it doesn't have to be done this one way. You can do it so many different ways and be inventive with the process in hopes that it serves to make a better product. You don't have to have an army of 200 people, 180 of which are standing by.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of different things. And I think for me, I've been trying really hard to just have those boundaries that, like, I'm not working Sunday. I did for a year, but now that's not what I'm going to do. And let people know that that's my boundary. And it's worked out pretty well. So I guess this kind of all goes under the umbrella. Yeah, it's hard. And yeah, it is demanding. And there's ebbs and flows. But I still think you can have boundaries.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, you mentioned something about like independent film and being creative with the process. So James, I know you're working on a film right now. Could you really quickly just talk to us a little bit about the project that you're currently developing and what some of your I don't know what your considerations are in terms of, are you considering any creative, quote unquote, creative approaches to the workflow or to the process?
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. My plug. This is my moment. Has it been a year? I think it's been almost a year. Well, maybe a little bit less, because I think I finished writing in August of last year. Because of the program and doing that 12-week and all that stuff, that's actually what helped motivate me to write my feature. And then it's just been rewrites and sending it out to friends, getting your feedback. And from there, Dane, a good friend of mine, was he's a student at Columbia, and he wanted to use it as his senior thesis. And that's what really kind of got a lot of traction there, because now we've pitched to a small studio, waiting to hear back from them, as well as just kind of a couple of other contacts through the Columbia thesis pitch. And we're still in kind of development, still doing a lot of writing and things like that. And it's essentially about a girl in Wyoming that joins an all-boy wrestling team. We've interviewed about a dozen girls, some current, some from a decade ago, that wrestled. And it's kind of a hodgepodge. What word am I trying to find? Wanted to say culmination. That's not a word. That's not right. Like collection. We'll go with that. Collection of their stories into one fictional character. So the lead protagonist, her name is Jaden Rawlings, and she's a senior. And the things that happen, I mean, obviously she's not real, but the events and things that did happen happened to these other girls. And what was the other question? What was your? That
was great. It was a perfect pitch, by the way.
I love it.
I tried. I was trying to be brief. It doesn't happen to me.
Oh, it's okay. I've got a movie that I'm editing right now, and I'm like, it's about.
Yeah. Yeah, I could only imagine.
There are some movies that just pitch so easy, and then there's some where it's like, ugh. You did great. The question was, are there any workflow or process considerations?
Yeah. So there's always the expectation when you're on a film shoot is that it's going to be long hours and you're going to work 6 days a week. I mean, it's going to be 12 hours plus. And talking to Dane was really interesting because he built into our budget to give the crew more rest, that they'll do better work, and that they'll actually, and what you can accomplish in 8 hours with sleep and things like that, you could have done on a 12-hour day anyway. And so what Dane and I have discussed, and again, this is still pending financing, but to do 5 days in 8-hour days, and to scatter a break. So to take either like a Wednesday or Thursday off, and also Sunday is the plan. And again, that's the ideal. That's what we're hoping to do. But it's Ultimately, you want people to be able to have it be an enjoyable process. And and the more that they enjoy it and have fun, the better their artistic expression and contribution to that project is. So yeah, that might mean that we have a little bit less coverage, or that might mean that some things might have to change. And I think for me as a director, the script isn't, carved and engraved in gold. I know the limitations of my writing, and if someone can bring something better, woo, let's go with it. It's kind of a guideline and framework of like, hey, this is where the path needs to lead. And so I feel like it's very malleable, and I think what best serves the result of like, hey, we need to get from point A to point B. Let's all be well rested. Let's all have a good time. Let's enjoy our time here. And I'll be understanding and flexible and still kind of know the direction we need to go, but let's figure this out together. And hopefully we can do so and not feel like we're dying.
So this next question is one that I've struggled with for years. I love this idea, James, and I've actually, Anna and I had this goal on our
tried
feature,
this out as well, yeah.
and we had a few days where we had success. But
what was it like? What was it? Did you notice a difference?
Well, no, because we only had a few of those days where we were like, we did it. But for the most part, it was like, we shot in 8 hours. Now let's spend the next 8 hours like prepping, because we really have a lot more work to do. Our pre-production was way too short. So you guys, I think, on this film are doing the kind of prep we were doing on the other movie we were working on, which was just, like a solid year of just really preparing it. Whereas we were writing scenes the night before we shot them, not because we were unprepared, but because it was a very loosey-goosey kind of experimental approach. But the reason I have had this question for years is I've often thought about how do I get film down to 8-hour days, not because I want it to be easier, but because I want the burden on the production and not on the families or on the individuals and health and relationships and things like that. And like you said, I believe that will translate into better filmmaking and better artists showing up with their brains completely awake. Because we know that sleep deprivation literally shuts parts of your brain off, which we don't want. I want everyone's whole brain there. But I'll ask you the hardest question I know. And I'll just throw it on you, so maybe you'll help me. How do you justify that to your investors? Because as an investor, let's say I wanted to give you, a few 6-figure donations, and I was like, wait, you want to shoot 8-hour days, but your actors are getting paid day rates, right? They're not any cheaper for an 8-hour day versus a 12-hour day. And your cameras aren't any cheaper because they're only being used for 8 hours as opposed to 12 hours. Like, everything is on day rate. And I think that's why Hollywood has kind of gone to this, like, well, we'll just do 20 hours. And then the unions are like, let's make it 12, like, and then they're like, okay, 12 plus overtime. So how do you justify to an investor an 8-hour workday if you're paying everyone day rates or renting everything day rate?
Really good question. And I haven't had to do that yet. So it'll be interesting when I do. But I think if I had magically had an investor here today, what I would probably say is very similar to kind of what we already said, is that it will create a better result. How many shooting days, was Jaws? How many days over did they shoot? And no one talks about it. And how many days over was Titanic? No one talks about it. I mean, how many days? And those are a little bit different kind of scenario. But you ask anyone about any movie, and I mean, the quantity of time, I don't think necessarily dictates how great this project is, or no one really cares, about how fast a movie was made unless it's good. So the very first thing you have to get to is making this a great movie, making this good. And to do that, the best way to ensure that is that your crew, your staff, your cast are happy and taken care of and want to be there. And if you can check that box, then, hey, you're that much closer and that much more prepared to make a better movie. It doesn't matter who cares about how fast it was made.
Yeah, I feel like it's a quality versus quantity thing. It's like we could get more shots if everyone pushed harder at the end of the day, we have more shots and more shots that we can't use. So
Right.
that actually could increase the cost. It's wasting, wasting energy, wasting time, and wearing us out because we're all exhausted. It's a marathon. Making a feature film is just, you have to have, like, on a marathon, when we ran our first marathon, we realized you have to eat before the end of the run or your body will completely run out of energy. So unlike a shorter run, you can't just like sprint and make it to the end. You will pass out or bonk or whatever if you don't ingest some quick calories.
Yeah, like you don't see many people running 5Ks eating like burgers,
Right.
you know? But like you'll see people eating all kinds of things on mile 20. Like we were eating bacon. Literally, we ate bacon on our marathon. It was salty.
Yeah. And so same thing with a feature film. I feel like you could on a short film like just push and work tons of hours and survive.
Yeah, just like shoot like 36 hours straight and don't sleep. Like
Once you're doing that for a month, it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, and you two kind of, well, you've experienced this, you know this better, but in part, I want, you know, what you said about like, hey, we planned for those 8-hour days and yeah, we still ended up doing 16, but think if you had planned for 12-hour days, you know, then you're just cooked. So I still think even though it didn't work quite necessarily how you thought, I still think it was a benefit because it gave you a little bit of the wiggle room to do some more prep for the next day, you know, or whatever that may be. So
Like,
that's kind of nice thing. It has a little buffer. Everyone's already used to 12. If you go over, no one, you know, it's, you would prefer not to, you try not to, but there's a little bit of a safety net. If you're over 12, people are just like, okay, when am I going home? I have so much to do and I haven't done laundry and, you know, their lives, you know, they get home and they still have stuff to do. And so I think it's a nice little buffer as well. It has a safety net in case you do need to go over.
Yeah, I think that's something I wish I had done differently, is not made the expectation of like, we're just going to work 8 hours and then be done. I wish we just treated it like a normal 12-hour day and then we end early and just say, we're done early. You can go home. Because then what happened is we were going over and everyone's like, okay, you had this great vision and it didn't turn out, you know?
Yeah.
And so
well,
then
we also just learned what the real price of an 8-hour day is.
Yeah,
and that price is
preparation.
like intense preparation. So now we know. And so I'm fully confident that in the next film, we will actually be clocking 8-hour days.
We did achieve it. It just,
Yeah.
we had to learn. Yeah.
This movie was in large part for us just counting the costs of what it actually takes to make a film and make a film the way we want to make it. But so speaking of buffering, let's talk about coaching. So James, you've
Let's talk about the program because you brought that up that helped you write this film. So that's a good transition.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was making a pun to make the transition, but
Sorry, but I don't know if people get it because they don't know what
yeah,
buffering and coaching
if you don't
means.
get the joke, sign up for the Film Family Academy, and then you'll get the joke. So
Fair enough.
You got to keep watching.
so James, you mentioned 12 weeks. What are you talking about? What 12 weeks, and what did you do, and what did that do for you?
Yeah. So I don't know if I was part of the beta team.
You're the alpha dog, James.
Oh, yeah. I was alpha among the betas. Yeah. I first guy. So you guys reached out to me about the program and I did they called it like a free trial for 6 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it so much that I did another 6 weeks after that. And it was really interesting because, you know, I enjoyed it. And I'm like, okay, I think I get the hang of this. And there was part of me, it's like, hey, you know, the 6 weeks, I think I got it. But there was just something that was telling me, hey, just do it a little bit longer, see where this goes. Because it was enough to be taught this philosophy, to be taught the brain exercises, but not to practice and like live it. And so what happened in the next 6 weeks was much what I would say exponential growth. That's when I decided I could write a screenplay and write my first feature and get it and do it. You know, again, I knew the model in the first 6 weeks, but it was the second 6 weeks. That's when I was like, okay, now I actually can understand this and I'm doing it. and committed and made it happen. So
right now, you're a healthy, happy, intrepid filmmaker with a film getting pitched to, senior faculty at Columbia and studios looking at it, and you're getting this thing going. All right, so paint the picture for me. So you said it's what helped me realize that I could write a screenplay. What was keeping you from writing a screenplay before? Like, talk to me about where were you at when you started?
Before all of it.
Man, this is a fun little brain exercise, because and again, I would say once I did it, I'm still happy to do it. That's the thing, is the screenplay is, anyway, that's a whole other story. The rewriting has been almost just as hard as the first draft, but once you've done it, then it's just encouraging to do more. And it's, you just kind of it just becomes more kinetic to do it. But I had a dozen, I think, it might have been a dozen of either outlines or the first 40 pages of scripts. I'm not kidding. All different ones, all abandoned. Never went anything with it, because I loved filmmaking, or I loved writing, but I just couldn't get over the hill, because that vibrance that we talk about, like the riding the wave of motivation, it would die down. It would just kind of, it'd be, for whatever reason, it'd be low tide in my life, and I'd just be like, I don't feel like writing this. And then all of a sudden that idea gets washed away, and you kind of forget why it was a burning desire before. And so you move on to the next burning idea, and that seems to be high tide. And you're splashing around. This is the best thing ever. I'm totally finishing this one. And then, it goes away. So after doing that for so long, I think one of the big ideas of the program that lit a spark within me is that you can generate that motivation. You don't need to wait for high tide. You can basically make the waves yourself. And it worked.
So since that's like the main thing that you're bringing up right now, could you help me understand how to create motivation as opposed to waiting for high tide? Is a great metaphor.
Because high tide only comes at midnight. But after a lot of Mountain Dew. High tide looks like. But I think it was changing my mindset from like, oh, this is hard, or oh, I need some external force or stimuli that I couldn't. I think there was a lack of confidence that I could do it. And so relying on, just that kind of surge of energy or motivation, but that, again, it fades. You don't really operate on that level all the time. And that's just not how people are. We have our highs and lows. And so what it was just learning to have the confidence that, like, changing my thinking from like, oh, this is so hard and it's just going to be so much time. It just broke it down. It's like, do an hour a day. And if you don't have anything, you walk away and you try again the next day, but at least you're working towards the goal. You can do anything, that it's not hard an hour a day. I think that's what we put into the model, is that this is just going to take an hour a day. And what happened is I never sat at the computer an hour, not once. It always took me like 30 minutes, and you're on that cusp of giving up and just saying, oh, I got nothing. I've been staring at a blank page. There's nothing in here. And then all of a sudden you hit a keystroke and something sparks, and you're looking at it and you're like, oh my goodness, it's been 3 hours. I have to go to bed, but I don't want to, And so I think that's what kind of turned the corner, is realizing that, that the situation is neutral, that you can make of it what you want, and thinking that something is hard and difficult and that it's just, this monumental hurdle makes it so. It makes it a mountain if you think it's a mountain. And rather than just like, hey, there's a hurdle, in a race, and it'll take some energy, but it's not going to be that bad. and it became fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I really like that you're describing some thoughts, honestly, that sound really unique, but they are what worked for you to get that result. You're talking about the model, which we're familiar with, but for anyone who's not familiar with it, you talked about how you kind of learned it. The model is, the basic premise. I mean, you can explain it in 30 seconds, right? Is that circumstances trigger our thoughts create our feelings are what drive our actions, and that our actions are what create our results. And that when we start to not allow our circumstances to simply trigger our thoughts, but we follow those thoughts into the subconscious and then choose what thoughts we're going to think, that's how we start to change what our feelings and our actions, etc., become, and we can start to determine our results, like what you were just doing. But my question is, you mentioned this, like, oh, once I learned it, and then there was this separate phase where you started to master it. You actually started to apply it to your life. And I don't know if any of us have truly mastered the model. Honestly, I think it takes a long time. But I think it's easy when we listen to the podcast, or even when we start lessons or whatever, to be like, oh yeah, it sounds intuitive. I mean, at first, I think Anna and I, we talked about when we first were starting to learn about the model, which is Brooke Castillo pioneered it. We were like, wow, that's really profound. But I get it. It makes sense, right? Like, but it's really kind of sounds life-changing, but you don't really realize how life-changing until you really work at it. And conscious effort is absolutely required. So I guess what was the difference there between like learning it and then starting to apply it? And what do you think would have happened if you'd learned it those first 6 weeks and then maybe not continued on to the application process?
Well, Anna's a really good coach, and she explains things very well. And I think she may have told me this model at least once in every single one of our sessions for those first 6 weeks, because it's a different mindset. I think, at least for me, I liked having an excuse. I think our first thing was like, my boss is, I gotta make sure he's not around. My boss is so hard, and it's just such a difficult job, and he's so mean. And I liked having that as a crutch, having that as an excuse. It helped cushion, it helped cauterize this wound of that, hey, I want to write a script. I want to do other things, but I feel exhausted from my work. I feel just completely drained and sapped. So of doing the things I have to do or need to do, that I can't do what I want. So I was able to just kind of write this excuse that, oh, my work is just too tough and I just don't have the time. And even if I did, it's just so I don't have the, emotional capacity, because my job is just so tolling and taxing. And it's hard to change your mindset to say, I can, that I actually have control, that the situation is neutral, that there could be 100 different people in this scenario with my same boss, and there will be tons that say he's the best guy ever. I love him. And there'll be people that think he's a lot worse than me. And I get to choose how I see that. Now, obviously, there are bosses that are bad and mean, but I realized, taking a look and assessing my situation, circumstance, I realized that I was very fortunate, and that there were things that, it was very, it took a lot of time. He was demanding of my time, but he was also compensating me for it. So I was like, you know what? This isn't really that bad. And it kind of, made me work harder and get things and do things more productive, but also just value my free time more, rather than just trying to like bend it decompressing in front of the TV and just trying to forget that I have to do something tomorrow. It was like, no, I can do this. My job doesn't suck. My boss is not, a mastermind arch villain. So therefore, my life's pretty good. So I can go and I can do this other thing. I can actually work and write and make movies. Because that was the other thing, is I had all these projects I never finished. I made more projects after the 12-week program than in those 3 months that followed than I had in the last year and a half in LA. and just started to complete stuff. And it just felt good. And creativity kind of just leads to more creativity. It was literally just making sets of waves. And who's to say if any of it's actually good? But I was having fun.
I think
it's good.
I think you're onto something. I liked a lot what you said about like 100 people in my exact shared circumstance are going to handle all these circumstances differently. And that's something that Anne and I have talked about, where like, could someone step into these circumstances and choose to take a nobler perspective, or could they step into these exact circumstances and accomplish everything I think I can't do? I mean, that there are people that could do that. Like, it's almost like obvious when you think of it that way. Someone could step into my life with my family, with my schedule, and they could just figure out how to squeeze an hour out of that schedule and how to choose to do something different with that time that you're wasting. Like we all know we have some, right? It doesn't make us bad people. It's just that when you think of it that way, yeah, it's like the circumstance is not the determining factor that controls the result. And so I guess you successfully walked through the model enough times and in enough ways that you started to generate results that were real in a pretty short amount of time. I mean, you literally said like 3 months after the 12 weeks, you generated basically more productivity. How long was it until you had a first draft? I mean, you'd spent years after film school. How long was it after those 12 weeks that you had a first draft of a script?
I think we did the 12-week program. I think, was it end of March? Not this last year, but the year before. I think it was end of March, and that took us 12 weeks. So I started at the beginning of summer writing, which was probably June. And I think I had my first draft August or September, I believe. I could go back and look at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was pretty close.
Well, and what's interesting is, so when I started out doing the coaching, I was just selling 6 weeks of private coaching as a package. And I started to realize that 6 weeks was enough for people to start to experience an internal change. They started to feel different. They started to, like, their life didn't look that different, but they started to feel different in their same circumstances. And when I would get people who would sign up again and do another 6 weeks and do at least 12 weeks of private coaching, that the results started to become more exterior, not just on the inside. It was like, oh, now it's visible to other people. And that was sort of my experience as well. Like at first, it's just this internal thing. And then you start to see the model all the way through, like that those beliefs, if you stick with them, will change your results. And soon your whole life is starting to look different. And other people will look at you and say, whoa, what happened? Like something is different here. And so anyway, that's why now the program offers 12 weeks. So it's interesting to hear your experience with the first 6 and then the second 6, because I think that's pretty typical that it starts internally and then spreads to the external.
Absolutely. And it's also like we kind of focused on that first 6 weeks on that problem with my boss, right? That was basically it. And then the next 6 weeks, it started to open up and it's like, okay, I want to look more into the filmmaking and the creative side. I also wanted to talk, a little bit about my weight and dating. And you started to apply it to not just one of the concerns or issues or, whatever circumstance it is. Because I think that's what, for me, the first 6 weeks was like, okay, it's addition and subtraction. That's all we're doing. And then you start to get the order of operations in that second 6 week. You're like, oh my goodness, it can be applied to literally anything. And I started to do that.
So could you tell us a little bit about that? How did it affect other areas of your life?
I mean, I think the weight one is pretty obvious. But it was just like, hey, this is a situation that I have control over. And you start to kind of take an inventory and say, okay, what do I want that end result to be that feeds my situation, that brings evidence back to support the thought? Because that's the thing that's always interesting is, like Kent, you said earlier, is that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. So if you change your thought and you have that result and that kind of goes back into the situation, you start to think about things differently. And so in the life of dating, it was like, oh, I'm literally in Casper, Wyoming. For any people that are listening to this from Casper, Wyoming, I love it here. but there just aren't that many people. And I'm like, there is no one here today. I don't meet anyone. I hang out on the roof all day working and shooting, and I just don't meet anyone. So instead of just saying, oh, my initial thoughts were, oh, there's no one, I can't find anyone, there's no one here, or it's too hard, or, all the other different kinds of excuses, because that's what they are. You start to think that, like, hey, it's not hard to go on a date. It's fun to go on a date. I want to have fun meeting people. And that's literally how it started. And you go and you start to date different people. And when we were traveling around, I even went out on dates there. It was so funny. There was one girl that I met at church, and I was there a week, and she's just like, where do you see this going? And I was like, well, I just thought we'd go to the movies.
Where do you see this going? The same place everything in my life is going. The movie.
I'm in Colorado Springs until Tuesday, and that's where I see it going. You get in my car and driving away. I'm sorry. But, it's just...
Oh, man, I love it so much.
Just, it opened me up to opportunities, I guess is the best way to put it, is rather than dreading it, rather than thinking, again, that it's just, I can't do this. It just opened me up that this is fun. This is a good time. And lo and behold, now I'm dating someone from Casper, Wyoming. So it happened, and it just opened it up to it. And there's no way I would have been able to date her had I not had that kind of change in my attitude and mindset. So I think that's the big thing, is first 6 weeks, learning it, kind of trying to think the different way and say, okay, no more excuses. I have control of how I feel about this situation. The circumstance is neutral. To start to applying it, living it. And it takes a little minute to see those results, but when you see them, it's like it's what you thought. And that's like, whoa.
Yeah, I have to add my own feelings to that in terms of Anna and I've mentioned this many times. Anna coaches me still. And even it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Wow. Yesterday I got coached on something really personal and was just opening up and kind of, I'm really familiar with the model, so you get really self-conscious and you start to qualify everything you say, and you have to kind of get over that. But I kind of just laid it all out, and then the only thing she said during the whole coaching session, I feel, because I was blabbering through the whole thought download portion of it, and then I kind of filled in the model myself or whatever. Then she just would be like, so what are you thinking in that circumstance? What is your thought there? And it sounds so basic. It sounds so basic. With anyone who's listened to the podcast several times and you're getting familiar with the model, you go, oh yeah, I get it. The thoughts, create your feelings. We get it. And then you'll be in these sessions, and it'll be the coach will direct you to figure out what that thought is, and then drive it all the way to the result. And then you'll go, okay, well, I know this is the result because I'm living it, and I know that this is the thought, which I hadn't really taken the time to identify before. And then it was boom. And the one thing we always say is the thought always mirrors the result. They're almost always the same thing. That thought is literally creating your results, and they almost are the thought, I don't have enough time, almost always creates the result that you don't have enough time, because you're actually acting in a way that's you're filling your time with these other things, and so you literally are forcing time out of your day or whatever. That's just one random example, but it's always this play that's so surprising to me. And once I realized I did it again, I was like, what? The thought literally created the result, and it was the exact mirror. And then we did the intentional model, and I almost got emotional. It was such a breakthrough. I was like, it always seems simple and basic, but I think that's how you know it's true. You're like, well, yeah, that's obviously true, but my subconscious brain didn't realize it was true. Maybe it can recognize that, but I had to kind of expose my subconscious brain and then just drop truth right on top of it. And it was take that, it's wow, there it is. And yeah, so sometimes I worry. I guess my worry is that sometimes when you talk about these realizations that you were having, and I sometimes talk about realizations that I have in coaching, it sounds so obvious unless you're the one thinking the thoughts. And then when you experience a coaching session and you realize, I was thinking that, once you bring it out into the open, you're like, well, that's obviously not a great thought. Like, but it's your subconscious brain thinking it. It's not your conscious brain thinking it. We don't walk around all day going like, I'm the worst, I can't do anything or whatever. But then like you get into a specific circumstance and you realize, oh, I actually think that I can't do this. I actually think that I'm not even capable of learning this thing, or I'm not capable of doing this thing. And so I don't know. I just think it is. I've had the same experiences that you're expressing, James.
Well, and there is nothing like actually doing it to experience it for yourself, because you're right. Like from the outside, you can see everything. It's easy to watch someone else get coached, to watch someone else have that experience. But when it's you just realize, oh, I had these blind spots. I had no idea that they were there. And then it's so mind-blowing to overcome those. But I guess my last question for you, because I know you've got to go, would be thinking about that. I guess I'm thinking about someone who's just listened to the podcast and has not experienced coaching yet. And so to them, it still feels very basic or maybe a little weird. What was your first impression when I reached out to you about doing this program? Did you have doubts? Did it seem strange to you? What would you say to someone who's in that situation now?
I definitely thought it was very basic and weird. I was like, the very first one that I was like, this just can't be it. I just changed my thought, like as if, where's the fairy dust? Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, there's no Neverland, and that kind of thing. And it was, I think it's exactly like you were saying, Kent, is that I think it's so easy, especially when looking at someone else's problems. You can just, it's easy to give advice or opinions. And even I'm sure someone that's listening and saying, well, like, duh, James, obviously. But like you said, it's hard to do it in your own life, like you were saying, Anna. And I think what it really comes down to is we make so many different decisions. And at least for me, I make them very reactionary, because this thing happened, therefore I got to do this. And it's either just on instinct or gut or emotion. And you never think as to why I did that thing. I think the model gives a lot of tools and is a very unique way of thinking, but mainly it teaches you to be more analytical, more studious of what your motivations are, of what you're afraid of why you do certain things. It just takes a minute to say, okay, like, why did I've been wanting to run for days. I've been wanting to exercise. I got a gym membership, and here I am on the couch. I've gone through half a bag of Totitos, and it's done. The goose is cooked. I'm done. I'm going to bed. And you're just like, why did I do that? Why? I had all these other things. I had a plan. I was trying to trick myself, and I just didn't do it. And so it's taking an inventory of yourself and saying, what makes me do the things that I do? Because we make decisions so rapidly, so quickly, and so many each day that we just don't really fully understand why we do what we do. And the model is a way of not just understanding what's around you and how things, are around you, but mainly yourself, and determining that I don't have to be what other people think I should be or who other people want me to be. I have the capacity and the ability to be who I want to be. And I can start to build that person consciously every single day. And I think that's really what the model did. And so I think for anyone that's listening, that should, again, sounds crazy. You might be on the different spectrums of like, this is weird and like too far out there. Sounds like pixie dust. Or it might be like, it's just thoughts. How hard can it be? But the truth of the matter is that it works. And it works in unexpected, surprising ways, because I think for everyone, there is parts of ourselves, like you said, blind spots, things we don't understand, or things that we're not really paying attention to, or we don't really know why. and we could all use help facing our fears anyway. So I think in that whole little pretzel of an answer, there might be something to go off of. But I think it helped me understand me. And I think anyone and everyone could benefit from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much, James. We really appreciate you coming on, and we love talking to you in any circumstance, including podcast episodes. So good luck on your film.
Is there a way that if anyone wants to find out more about it, or connect with you, how would someone do that?
They can call me directly.
My phone number is.
I'll be the first guy to give my phone number out.
Watch out.
Well, give him your producer's. What's your producer's email?
We actually built. We can do. Oh, Dane's a little busy, but you can just email. It's jnhall@hotmail.com. Yes, I'm still rocking the Hotmail, and it's great, and I'm loving every second of it. That's a situation I don't want to change, and I'm happy with it.
Hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
Terrence Malick is still rocking the typewriter, so
Yeah, the typewriter and PTA, I still think uses Word. So
yes.
It's like, you know, like why not? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I love doing this. It's great to talk to you too, and always wish that there was just more time.
Yeah, we'll do it again after you've made your movie.
There is more time.
We'll have you back on, but thank you so much for joining us, and I would encourage everyone to check out James's work and
check out James.
He is dating
He's
someone.
dating someone
for now.
so just
yeah. But he is an up and coming writer director. You'll wanna keep your eye on. So thanks for joining us, James. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much, Kent and Anna. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 If you want a successful career making feature films and a happy family at the same time, visit invisiblemansion.com/film and family to apply for our next enrollment window in the Film and Family Academy, which closes July 1st, 2021. We only accept a select group of qualifying filmmakers each quarter.
If you qualify, you will receive private mentorship in addition to lifetime access to our library of courses. Our alumni are already realizing major career milestones and seeing dramatic transformations in their personal relationships. So if you don't want those results, don't apply.
If you do, visit invisiblemansion.com/film and family and click apply before July 1st of this year.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.